Look fellas, YouTube hasn't been paying a lot lately, so I'm looking for a side hustle. Babysitters typically aren't compensated very well, maybe $15 an hour to babysit a child. However, you can hack the system. By babysitting 50 children at a time, I stand to make
2 + 3 ×
$750 an hour. The issue is, before anyone is going to trust me with all 50 of their children, they're going to want to know what my average mortality rate is. And so we're going to collect some data on that in this week's challenge, because I will be babysitting 50 children in Rimworld. Oh, and just for fun, each child suffers from a metabolic dependency on alcohol. The longer someone with this trait goes without alcohol, the more negative effects they accrue. Typically, by day 30, they enter a coma, and by day 60, they die. Society would classify this as a cruel act of God, but I decided those kids still had it too easy, so I installed some mods to speed things up a bit. Now the children enter a state of severe delirium after 3 days without alcohol, by 6 days they're fully comatose, and by 9 days, well, let's just be thankful I'm not running the cannibalism perk. Here's where the real challenge comes in. I've turned on the setting Characters Explode on Death. This, combined with the baby's life-threatening alcoholism, turns them into a literal ticking time bomb that can only be defused with beer. If I fail to adequately supply alcohol to minors, I risk causing a chain reaction of exploding babies, which could destroy my reputation as a babysitter. Before we begin, I don't know if I'm asking a lot here, but I need you all to become very comfortable with the idea of baby mortality, because this, personally, I'm shooting for like a 70% survival rate. But before we get into that, I'd like to tell you about this video's sponsor, Atlas VPN. This is a highly trusted data protection company with years of experience and over 6 million users. I'll be honest, if you've clicked on this video publicly, I shudder to think of what depraved, inhuman content you're clicking on privately. But here's the issue, it's not private. You see, going on the internet without a VPN is like going to the supermarket without any clothes. People are going to judge you, and then you're going to jail. However, Atlas VPN is offering a limited time deal. They will protect your personal data for only $1.83 per month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. They're even throwing in 3 extra months for free. $1.83, for God's sake, if you can't afford that, how are you going to afford a lawyer when the FBI finds out about all those games you tested? But hey, even if you're not on a watch list like the rest of us, you can still enjoy the other benefits of Atlas VPN. For example, maybe the cruel authoritarian sycophants at Netflix don't offer your favorite shows in your region. With Atlas VPN, I press one button and suddenly Reggie has become Regcenzo of the Lombardia region. Now I can consume the real intellectual content that my brain yearns for. My searches are protected, my ads are blocked, I'm officially vacationing in Italy, and it only cost me $1.83 per month. Simply amazing. If you've ever thought about trying a VPN before, this is your chance. Follow the link on screen or in the description to try Atlas VPN and protect your online data before it's too late. Thank you, Atlas, for sponsoring this video. Now let's begin. If I'm going to babysit 50 filthy drunks, I'm going to need a team of super nannies. Through careful genetic manipulation, I've managed to transform 6 otherwise normal colonists into inhuman monstrosities that have only one purpose in life: babysitting. They are equipped with a 28-foot horizontal leap, 50% increased move speed, they don't need to sleep at all, and I've even installed a fire extinguisher in each of their throats. There are some downsides, but we can deal with that later. Let's get to babysitting. Here we are, 6 albino babysitters with a genetic framework so complex that our bones could emulsify at any second. But where are the babies? Well, they actually dropped in ahead of us, and many of them are laying in a shallow pond right now, but they landed butter side up, so it's all good. Each of the babies is one of the commenters from my last video. If you see your name on screen right now, congratulations, your life is now in danger. Typically in this situation, I would start by assessing the terrain for a suitable place to create our base. But the logistics of transporting 50 babies is just not on our side, so I think we'll kind of construct the settlement around the children. The reality of the situation is, everyone in this colony will be dead pretty soon if we don't get our hands on some alcohol or at least some good mouthwash. Given this, our first concern is planting some crops. We'll need some basic food and hops, which we can later refine into beer. I have no self-control, so I just went ahead and planted about 200 of each. With our agricultural investment complete, we must now turn our attention to securing the pay payload. There are a lot of dangerous animals in this biome, and as much as I'd love to see a cougar blow its own head off by eating a baby, I just can't afford to jeopardize my professional reputation like that. So, how should we go about designing our industrial nursery? Good question. You see, I've tried this challenge once before, and let's just say it didn't go well. In fact, I made one huge mistake. I was treating the babies too much like people, when really I should have been treating them like highly enriched uranium. When you get too much uranium in one place, it can initiate a nuclear criticality incident which causes an explosion. See Japan in 1945 for more information on this. It's the same thing for these little bastards. If I just store them all in one big warehouse, all it takes is one baby going critical, and before you know it, the entire room is coated in flaming viscera. That's why for the design of this new nursery, I'm going to be taking inspiration from a certain famous nuclear reactor. By dividing my fissile material into several sub-reactors, we can reduce the potential for nuclear Armageddon. Sure, reactor A might go critical, but reactors B, C, and D are far enough away to ensure the safety of their contents. Over the next couple days, our baby containment center started to take form. It's surprising just how much you can get done when you work 24 hours a day, stopping only to eat and play horseshoes. It took us a while to wrangle the herd of babies into position, but after separating them into several protective pods, we can finally breathe a sigh of relief. The next thing we need to address is the issue of alcohol production. We need to acquire at least 50 bottles of beer every 9 days. We have plenty of hops planted, which is a great start, but processing them into beer within a reasonable time frame will require two things. One, a mega brewery equipped to process and ferment hundreds of bottles of beer at a time, and two, way more slave labor. We gotta really pump these numbers up. I'm talking 1840s levels of human rights violations. Because it's one thing to produce all this hops, but without a larger workforce, I doubt we'll be able to harvest and process it within the necessary time frame. This is where we must turn to technology. If we could create an army of robotic farm workers, we could increase our beer production substantially, and hopefully enough to stave off the apocalypse of 50 thermonuclear babies. The only way to assemble such an AI army is through the use of a mechanitor. At present, we don't have one. However, this map has an ancient exostrider body, which can get us started. I had the colonists approach the exostrider and beat the ever-living shit out of it. It eventually erupted in flames, which caused most of my babysitters to suffer an immediate mental breakdown because they have the pyrophobia trait, but one colonist possessed the mental fortitude to remain calm and launch his extinguishing foam onto the exostrider. This secured our payload of one mechanoid transponder. Once everyone was done hyperventilating, I had them return to the base to decrypt the transponder. This allows us to provide our coordinates to a hostile alien death squad, which will subsequently drop onto our map and try to kill us. Not what you want to hear from your nursery manager, but I need you to trust the process. If we can manage to defeat them, we'll be able to create our own mechanitor and eventually our own robotic army. We signaled the enemy drop pod and out came one scyther. Yeah, like the Pokemon. I had our babysitters utilize their 28-foot horizontal leap to outmaneuver the scyther and pick it apart with rifle fire. Eventually we killed it, which caused it to explode in a giant fireball and light all of our crops on fire. This made me realize it's not only our colonists that explode on death, everything explodes. Everything from the small animals running around the map to your own grandmother. Everything and everyone is a potential suicide bomber. A chilling revelation to say the least. Regardless, after we killed the scyther, we obtained a mech link and turned Starpig into a mechanitor. We converted these old ruins into a factory and began the gestation cycle on some robots to help us around the base. Soon we will be able to entrust the care of our children to a small army of cold, uncaring machines. You might think our colonists are able to achieve these superhuman feats because they're genetically gifted, and you'd be half right in that assumption. However, they've also got a lot of problems too, not the least of which is a physiological need to consume human blood. I don't like the term vampire, it makes people think you're some kind of weirdo, but the reality of the situation is we're going to need to take some people hostage and farm them for their blood. We managed to populate our blood collection clinic after the first raider attack. When this poor old boy showed up, I equipped some guys with maces and had them tenderize him real good. He responded by bleeding and losing consciousness. After locking him up and turning on the hemogen farm setting, we now have a supply of blood packs to keep our babysitters operating at superhuman levels. We may need to kidnap more people to extend our production, but for the time being, this will be okay. The next logistical nightmare we have to navigate is that for some reason, beer isn't recognized as an acceptable food item for babies, and as such, the children refuse to drink it. This is kind of a big deal, but much like paying child support, you can get around it if you know the right loopholes. For example, if you go to the surgery tab and scroll past all the gross stuff, you'll find a section for administering drugs. What some people don't realize is that there's also a section for administering alcohol. Therefore, we can keep our babies alive through the powers of medical science. By completing 50 life-saving alcohol transplants every week, we can keep our babies fed and unexploded. The issue is, we only have one doctor, and that's a pretty hefty workload. I'm worried he won't be able to complete all the surgeries in time. What we need is mastery, an expert surgeon who could perform a triple lung transplant in a dark room using only chopsticks. We could get there if we had enough time, but we don't. So we're going to take the easy way out. I'm talking about medically induced brain damage. You see, there's a condition in Rimworld called trauma savant. Basically, if a colonist gets just the right amount of brain damage, they can increase their surgery skill by about 50%. The key is to get in that Goldilocks zone. Too much brain damage and you've got yourself a new paperweight. Not enough brain damage and you're just wasting your time. Now listen, I know what you're thinking. Reggie, isn't it morally questionable to induce brain damage for personal gain? The answer is, I don't care, but if it makes you feel any better, I'll assure you that this procedure will be handled in the most professional and medically sound way possible. Basically, we're going to take that log over there and smash John on the back of the head with it until he doesn't know what year it is anymore. Actually, my personal litmus test to see if our colonist has accumulated enough traumatic brain injuries is to ask him if he feels brain damaged yet. And if he replies at all, we didn't go far enough. I had Starpig perform the procedure on John, and after a few attempts, we have successfully created a trauma savant who will hopefully be able to use his increased manipulation stat to process 50 surgeries per week. And just in case that isn't enough, I also have a small amount of cocaine that we can feed the doctor to increase his work rate. In fact, it's been almost 8 days now, so the babies are all comatose. This is both good and bad. Comatose babies don't cry, which means they can't provide a -24 mood modifier. However, it also means they're becoming very chemically unstable and will be exploding soon. It's time for John to perform his first life-saving treatment. He grabbed a cold one and set off to the nursery. After about an hour or so, the surgery was a complete success. The baby is absolutely hammered. What a lightweight. That was actually pretty easy. I thought this would be a more difficult surgery. You know what, John? We probably didn't even need to give you all that brain damage. Anyway, I had John perform the surgery on the other 49 babies. This consumed almost all of our starter beer, and so the timer is ticking again. We have about 8 more days until total Armageddon. Fortunately, it's harvesting season, and we just started hauling in some hops. From here, I had our colonists process them into wort so we could produce some beer. It's going to take a while, but all we can do is sit back and hope to God we make this beer before it's too late. After all, the babies are kind of cute when they're all in one piece like that. Over the next few days, we made several key advancements to our babysitting business. We produced a fleet of mechs to clean up the industrial amounts of vomit in our nursery, and if we get attacked, I can always repurpose them into suicide drones. Don't you feel safe now, children? We also researched microelectronics, which allowed us to enter a technological renaissance of sorts. No longer do we have to rely on puny solar panels, because now we can build an actual nuclear reactor next to our metaphoric nuclear reactor. I figure if we're going to have all the risks of acute radiation poisoning, we may as well get some of the benefits too. All is going well, however, we are again approaching 9 days without alcohol, and it's going to be a close call. As soon as the beer came out of the fermenters, I had John bring out the funnel and perform as many alcohol transfusions as he could. He was making great progress, but it soon became clear not everyone was going to make it. We didn't have enough time to operate on most of the babies in Reactor C, and it's going to blow. We need to move fast if we want to save our most valuable natural resource. The beer. I had our colonists brave the reactor to save 4 beer bottles. They managed to get out just in time as the babies went critical and decimated everything inside. This was very unfortunate, and for the sake of my reputation, we're going to pretend Reactor C never existed. Just A, B, and D, no questions asked. Anyway, the upside to this limit testing is that now we know we're going to have enough beer for next time. That's one huge obstacle out of our way, but I think we need to take this experiment even further. For First of all, while we have the beer production under control, these little winos still need a steady supply of nutrition, and even with the mechs, we're having a hard time producing enough food. This is where we must turn to our unlikely subterranean allies, the British. When they create a hive, it slowly produces insect jelly, which is extremely nutritious for the babies. One colony is pretty good, but to feed our remaining toddlers, we're going to need to attract even more. Fortunately, I know just the trick. You see, there's nothing the British love more than ingesting whole garbage bags of toxic waste, and we've got plenty of that. By creating a toxic waste dump in front of our base, we managed to attract several infestations, and eventually we had 14 hives producing insect jelly for us. All we have to do is sneak in at night and appropriate their colony's entire gross domestic product. It's also worth mentioning that this is the only way into or out of the base, so depending on what time you come to visit the nursery, you're either going to experience safe passage, or you'll be tore apart by the razor-sharp mandibles of enraged Englishmen. There's definitely some fine-tuning to do, but overall, it's working very well. Starvation is now a distant memory, and whenever the babies start to sober up from their bender, I just dispatch the party doctor to administer some of his miracle medicine, and we're all good. Over the next few weeks, I also managed to advance our nursery's military into a very formidable force. We now have flamethrower-wielding security guards and giant Gauss rifle caterpillars on every corner. This may seem excessive, but it's actually all necessary for the next part of our plan. Obviously, Reactor C didn't exist, but hypothetically, if it did, we would have lost 12 babies when it exploded. It's conceivable that we could just travel to another colony and forcibly adopt their babies to replace our missing babies, hypothetically. And so that's exactly what we did. I mobilized the military and we left to visit our neighbors. They didn't really understand the concept of adoption, so I had my robots explain it to them by burning their houses down. We had to visit 5 different colonies, but eventually we managed to accumulate a dozen replacement babies for our nursery. Fantastic. Reactor C is now open for business. However, I can't risk anyone finding out the truth about Reactor C, and we're going to have to go to great lengths to make sure no one realizes that these babies are just body doubles. First, I had to change their names and try to match up the skin tones as best I could. That was easy, but the bigger issue is that these kids don't have alcoholism like the rest of our babies. There's only one way to fix this. It took a lot of time and resources, but eventually we managed to develop our own high-tech laboratory, and through the wonders of science, we were able to genetically alter the replacement babies to turn them into raging alcoholics just like the others. These new babies are now one-to-one indistinguishable replicas of the originals. I don't like to gloat, but we've really outdone ourselves here. We have finally restored our nursery's mortality rate to a pristine 0%, worthy of patronage from even the most prestigious client. Technically, I could probably finish the challenge here, but I felt a certain connection to our little community, and I decided to raise the babies into children. I taught them many valuable lessons along the way. I even introduced them to gun safety by scattering several loaded shotguns and revolvers around the nursery and seeing if they'd take the bait. Fortunately, they all passed this test, and by day 100, they had graduated to childhood. Now ambulatory and somewhat verbal, they are ready to begin their journey as lifelong alcoholics. But first, they've got some debts to pay off. You see, I've invested a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into raising these kids, and the army of killer robots requires a lot of electricity to keep it up and running. So I think it's only fair to put the kids to work in the power plant. I've created 50 manually operated stationary bicycles that the kids will use to power the base. In total, this generates 15,000 watts of power, which is 5 times as much as a literal nuclear reactor. Some call me a lunatic with a madman's dream, but I genuinely believe this is the future of the human race. That's all we've got for this week, folks. We've raised a gang of alcoholic babies and put them to work in an internment camp. Big thank you to this month's patrons for making these videos possible, and finally, thank you for watching.